the spark that started it all. The unbelievable history of American drag racing. This story begins not on a drag strip, but on the banks of the Detroit River. Before there was Big Al, before there was Quad Al, before any of the legends were written down in magazines or whispered about in garages across the country, there was just a kid named Jim Little. Hello, this is Engines of Time. Thank you so much for watching. And before we start, please hit that subscribe button. It encourages me to make more videos like this. And trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. He grew up in Michigan, right in the thick of post-war American industry. A time when the sound of machines filled the air, and the idea of speed was woven into the national dream. Jim wasn't born into racing royalty. He was just a curious, mechanically minded teenager with a knack for taking things apart and, more often than not, putting them back together better than they were before. By 15, he was already a tinkerer, the kind of kid who would rather be in a garage than at a ball game. But that year, something happened that would change his life forever. He went to see the Gold Cup hydroplane races on the Detroit River. For a boy who loved machines, it was like stepping into another world. The air was thick with spray and the thunder of engines. But not just any engines. These were giant, piston-driven aircraft engines, the same power plants that had taken pilots to war and back. Allison V12s, massive, supercharged beasts, originally built for fighter planes, were now roaring across the water. The sight and sound of them burned into Jim's mind like a spark to dry fuel. In that moment, his fascination with power and mechanical beauty fused into something much deeper, a calling. Fast forward just 3 years. The fledgling NHRA was still finding its footing, hosting small but passionate events across the Midwest. One of them took place in Livonia, Michigan. Jim was there, wide-eyed, watching history unfold. So were the Arfons brothers, with their legendary Green Monster 2, an Allison-powered drag car that was rewriting what anyone thought possible on the quarter mile. When Jim saw that machine tear down the strip, the direction of his life locked into place. From that moment, his world revolved around engines. Big ones, loud ones, the kind that made the ground shake. He didn't just want to go fast. He wanted to build something the world had never seen. Over the next few years, Jim worked wherever he could to build his skills. When the Army called, he went. And even there, stationed in Texas, his mind was still on machines. It was in those quiet hours, far from home, that his imagination began to take form. In 1961, the wider world finally got its first glimpse of this quiet genius. The May issue of Hot Rod magazine featured a stunning Ford coupe, immaculate, powerful, and unlike anything else. It was Jim Little's car, powered by a fire-breathing Hemi engine he'd built with his own hands while serving in the Army. Every inch of it was a testament to his craftsmanship, clean welds, flawless paint, and an attention to detail that bordered on obsession. At the track, the coupe could hold its own against the best. In the magazines, it was a symbol of everything right about American hot rodding: ingenuity, individuality, and sheer willpower. But Jim Little wasn't the kind of man who stayed still for long. That feature in Hot Rod wasn't an arrival. It was the beginning of something far bigger. Because later that same year, a casual conversation in a Texas garage would set him on a path that no one, not even Jim, could have imagined. He'd been talking with another hot rodder about engines, the way car guys do. They were swapping stories, bench racing ideas, tossing around dreams. Someone overheard them and mentioned a local junkyard that had a few of those aircraft engines Jim had been obsessed with since he was 15, the Allison V12s. Jim had planned to put a big Buick engine into the chopped 1934 Ford Tudor sedan he was working on. But the idea of owning an Allison, of building something around that monstrous piece of engineering, was too much to resist. A few days later, he drove down to that junkyard. $100 changed hands, and with that, Jim Little owned his very first aircraft engine. He didn't just buy a piece of metal. He bought a dream, one that would eventually echo across drag strips, magazines, and legends for decades. 6 months later, after $11,000 of his own hard-earned money and countless hours in the shop, the Allison V12 was alive and roaring inside that 34 Ford. And with that, the world was about to meet Big Al.
Big Al, the birth of a legend. By 1962, Jim Little was ready to put his creation to the test. In his small Texas garage, under a single flickering light, sat one of the most outrageous machines ever built. A chopped 1934 Ford sedan, its slender frame hiding 12 cylinders and 1,700 cubic inches of fury. It wasn't sleek like a factory racer. It wasn't polished like a show car. It was brutal, a hot rod in the truest sense of the word. Underneath its blue paint and hand-formed body panels lay the heart of an Allison V12 aircraft engine, once meant to lift warplanes into the sky. Jim had turned it into a drag car. He called it Big Al. When word spread that someone was trying to put an aircraft engine in a car and run it down the quarter-mile, most people laughed. It sounded impossible, insane even. But Jim Little wasn't chasing approval. He was chasing a dream. So, in 1962, he towed Big Al to the AHRA Nationals in Dallas, Texas. For Jim, this wasn't just another race. It was a debut, a statement, and a test of everything he'd built with his own 2 hands. The car rolled up to the line, massive, thunderous, unlike anything the crowd had ever seen. When he dropped the clutch, the Allison roared to life, its propeller-driven fury now unleashed on asphalt. But within seconds, the clutch exploded, a violent, shattering burst of metal and smoke. The car lurched forward, hit just 77 miles an hour, and coasted to a stop. To anyone else, it might have been a failure. To Jim Little, it was data, a lesson, and the beginning of refinement. He went home and went to work. Jim didn't order parts, he made them. With the same resourcefulness that had defined his life, he designed and built drag racing's first 4-disc clutch from scratch. The innovation was years ahead of its time. He also constructed a 14-inch diameter torque tube, hand-built to tie the front of the car to the rear axle. It didn't just transmit power, it acted as a protective flywheel shield, containing the violence of the Allison in case of another failure. Each new piece, each small fix, made Big Al more refined, more formidable, and more reliable. When Jim returned to the strip, the results spoke for themselves. He ran Big Al at Lyons Drag Strip in California in early 1963, one of the most iconic racing venues in America. The car, now a balanced blend of airplane power and hot rod ingenuity, thundered down the corner mile in the 11s at over 130 miles per hour. The crowd was stunned. The noise alone was something to behold. 12 cylinders, 12 feet of flame, and a sound that belonged somewhere between a fighter jet and a freight train. Jim Little had built something no one had ever seen, and the magazines took notice. Drag News ran a story about the car, the kind of exposure that cemented Big Al as more than a curiosity. It was a phenomenon. As the months passed, Jim pushed harder. The car improved. The tuning got sharper. Before long, Big Al was running in the 10s at nearly 150 miles an hour, faster than almost any full-bodied drag car in existence. But even as Big Al was shocking crowds and grabbing headlines, new challenges emerged. The car's raw power created an unexpected enemy: air pressure. At speed, the sheer volume of air rushing over and under the car began tearing it apart. The hood would lift and rip free. The doors would fly open. The body panels, never meant to contain this kind of force, were literally being peeled away. Each pass was a battle not just against time, but against physics itself. Jim realized something had to change. The steel body that had served him so well couldn't survive the punishment. He needed something lighter, stronger, something entirely new. And as fate would have it, he found the answer in the pits at Lyons Drag Strip. There he met Fred Carrillo, the owner of Fibercraft, one of the premier fiberglass companies of the era. Carrillo was known for innovation. He made bodies for Corvettes, Cobras, and race cars all over California. Jim asked him a simple question: "Do you think it's possible to make a one-piece fiberglass body for a full-size car?" Carrillo smiled. "It's not only possible, I'll help you do it." He sold Jim the materials at cost and gave him guidance along the way, but the work itself, as always, was all Jim. He built a 5-piece mold from his existing Ford, reshaping the body as he went. He chopped the roof another 6 inches, lowering the profile until the windows were little more than narrow slits. The cockpit sat so low that Jim's head would actually poke through the top when he drove, not for style, but for visibility. 5 months later, Big Al 2 was born. Painted a soft Bahama blue, it looked like something out of a dream. A single, flawless shell of fiberglass lifted off the chassis as one piece. The craftsmanship was staggering. Every curve, every contour, smoothed by hand. Jim unveiled the car at the 1964 NHRA Winter Nationals car show in Pomona, California. It wasn't just another showpiece, it was a revelation. Big Al 2 was the first fiberglass sedan body in the world. Sure, there had been fiberglass sports cars before, Corvettes, Specials, and one-offs, but no one had ever built a full-size sedan body like this, one that could lift completely off the trance, revealing the entire mechanical structure beneath. It was a design so innovative that within a year, it would inspire the next generation of drag racing itself. Among those who saw it in Pomona was Fran Hernandez, who led Ford's experimental division. Years later, in the 1980s, Hernandez would admit that when Ford engineers were tasked with finding a way to beat the Chrysler Hemis on the drag strip in 1965, it was Big Al 2 that gave them the idea for the very first funny cars, the liftoff fiberglass bodies that defined an era. The proof was undeniable. The earliest funny cars in 1966 used the exact same concept, a one-piece, lift-off body, just like Jim Little's creation. But back in 1964, Jim wasn't thinking about changing the sport. He was just trying to make his car go faster. With its 2,300 horsepower Allison engine and lightweight fiberglass body, Big Al 2 weighed 2,850 pounds, and it was devastatingly quick. On its best run, it clocked a 9.31-second pass at 163 miles an hour. That was nearly a full second quicker and 15 miles an hour faster than any other full-bodied drag car in existence. It didn't just run fast, it ran perfectly. Jim barely had to touch it. He changed the oil once a year, never replaced the spark plugs, and never broke apart. In an era where most cars exploded more often than they finished runs, that was unheard of. But even as Big Al 2 made its mark, Jim's mind was already moving ahead. He wasn't a racer at heart. He was a builder. The thrill for him wasn't in competition, it was in creation. And so, in the spring of 1964, before Big Al 2 even hit its stride, Jim Little began dreaming of something even more unbelievable, something that would make Big Al 2 look ordinary. A project that, to this day, remains one of the wildest mechanical visions in drag racing history. He called it Quad Al.
Quad Al, the car that defied reason. By late 1964, Jim Little had already done what most people would have thought impossible. Not once, but twice. He had taken an aircraft engine, something built to propel warplanes through the sky, and tamed it for the drag strip. He had built the first fiberglass sedan body in the world, years before major manufacturers would even consider it. And he had run quicker and faster than any other full-bodied car alive. But for Jim Little, those accomplishments weren't an ending. They were a foundation. He once said, "I'm part of a dying breed, the do-it-yourself kind of hot rodder. 98% of the guys today are assemblers, not builders. The only thing I don't do myself is lathe work. And the day I buy my own lathe, I'll be doing that too." That quote from a 1964 issue of Popular Hot Rodding says everything about who Jim was. He wasn't chasing trophies or sponsorships. He was chasing the limit of what could be built by hand. And so, as Big Al 2 was still setting records, he sat down with a pencil and paper and began sketching something that made even seasoned racers laugh out loud. A car powered by 4 Allison V12 aircraft engines. Not one, not two, 4. It would produce, on paper, over 8,000 horsepower and 9,200 pound-feet of torque. Numbers so large they were practically meaningless in 1964. For reference, that's roughly 8 times the output of Don Garlett's top fueler from the same era. Jim's plan was audacious. A 160-inch wheelbase competition coupe with 4 engines linked in pairs, each pair driving either the front or rear set of wheels. The result would be a machine unlike anything the world had ever seen. Part airplane, part dragster, part fever dream. He even had a name for it. A simple one. Quad Al. He described it to Popular Hot Rodding with perfect confidence. "My next project will use 4 Allison engines, 8,000 horsepower, 9,200 foot-pounds of torque, and weigh around 7,000 pounds. I plan to link the engines in pairs using truck flywheels, each pair driving through a 5-disc clutch. 2 engines will drive the front dual slicks, and 2 will drive the rear. It will be a true competition coupe." People thought he was joking. He wasn't. Jim Little never joked about engineering. He started with a scale model, a miniature version to help him visualize the proportions, the drivetrain layout, and the impossible web of components he'd need to connect everything together. Even the model looked outrageous, but in Jim's mind, it made perfect sense. Within 6 months, that model became reality. In his workshop, surrounded by the smell of oil and metal, he began piecing together one of the most ambitious mechanical creations in automotive history. Each of the 4 Allison engines was massive, over 5 feet long, 1,700 cubic inches apiece, and weighing nearly 1,200 pounds each. To fit them all together, he had to tilt them at a 15-degree angle, carefully aligning the crankshafts and drives so they would mesh correctly. He linked each pair using International Harvester Model 450 truck flywheels, hand-machined and adapted for the purpose. Every connection was custom, every part designed from scratch. The power from those paired engines was sent through 6-disc hydraulic clutches, also hand-built, to the axles. The rear end used twin 1957 Pontiac center sections fitted with heavy-duty Ford 1.5-ton truck hubs and axles. Each differential carried a 2.41 gear ratio built to handle torque no human had ever tried to control. Up front, Jim installed a 2.5-ton military truck axle, also geared to 2.41, complete with massive Zeppa constant velocity joints to allow the front wheels to steer. A Buick steering box connected to the front axle with a 14-foot-long steering shaft that snaked down the chassis to the cockpit. Everything was overbuilt, and for good reason. The frame itself was a tank, 3-inch square tubing with 1/4-inch thick walls. The roll cage, also made from 2-inch square steel, was equally heavy-duty. This was no flimsy showpiece. It was a fortress designed to survive forces no one could even calculate. Jim fabricated torque tubes 18 inches in diameter, connecting the front and rear sections to contain the twisting power of the 4 engines. The wheels, custom built by Jim himself, using quenched steel plate for the centers, hand-welded, balanced, and aligned by eye. It was, in every sense, a monument to American ingenuity and one man's absolute refusal to accept limits. Then there was the exhaust. 96 pipes in total, 24 per engine, snaking outward like a metallic forest, each one crackling with potential. To fire the engines, he wired up 4 magnetos and used the combined 350 feet of Packard 440 spark plug wire. Every engine was throttled together with a series of bell cranks and linkages so precise that the entire quartet could be controlled by a single pedal. It was beyond overkill. It was art. When it was finished, Quad Al looked less like a drag car and more like something out of a Cold War science fiction film, a machine built for another world. A long, low body, a small, almost comical fiberglass coupe perched atop 4 enormous slicks, each pair dwarfing the car's tiny cockpit. The wheelbase stretched 160 inches, the proportions so strange that even seasoned racers had to stare twice just to make sense of it. People who saw it in person said it didn't look real, like it couldn't possibly exist. But it did. And Jim Little built it with his own hands. Unfortunately, the story of Quad Al doesn't end with a triumphant run down the strip. Despite all his skill, all his resourcefulness, and all his drive, Jim was still a regular working man. He made about $150 a week as a design draftsman. Every piece of metal, every bolt, every component had come out of his own pocket. By the time Quad Al was assembled, he'd spent everything he had. And to take it any further, to finish the clutches, custom gear sets, and the final driveline work, would cost another $5,000 in 1960s money. That was the equivalent of $50,000 today. It simply wasn't possible. So the most outrageous, most ambitious drag car ever built, a machine that might have redefined what a race car could be, never moved an inch under its own power. It never fired all 4 engines, it never spun a tire, it never ran a single second down the drag strip. Not because it failed, but because reality finally caught up to a dream that was just too big for its time. Quad Al became a symbol, not of failure, but of unbridled imagination. In a world where racers measured success by trophies, Jim Little had built something that couldn't be measured by wins or records. It was an expression, a monument to the creative spirit that defined an entire generation of hot rodders. And in its silence, it spoke louder than most engines ever could. But the story doesn't end there. Because even though Quad Al never ran, it still had one last journey ahead of it. One that would take it through tragedy, survival, and finally, preservation. After the dream, death, survival, and legacy. By the summer of 1965, Quad Al sat completed in Jim Little's shop. Every bolt torqued, every spark plug wired, every pipe hand-fitted. It was the ultimate expression of one man's engineering mind, but also, perhaps, the final test of his endurance. Jim had spent years working 12-hour days, splitting time between his day job as a design draftsman and endless nights in his garage. He wasn't just a builder, he was an inventor, a craftsman, a philosopher of motion. But he was also human. And humans, no matter how gifted, have limits. In early 1966, tragedy struck. Jim Little passed away suddenly, just as Quad Al was nearing its final phase of development. He never got to see it move, never got to feel the vibration of all four Allisons roaring in unison. The man who had built the most ambitious hot rod in history was gone at just 45 years old. In the years that followed, Quad Al and Jim's earlier creations, Big Al 1 and Big Al 2, became legends whispered about in drag racing circles. They weren't the kind of stories found in official record books, because Big Al was never built to fit rules or categories. They were part of something purer, the oral history of the American hot rod. The kind of story an older racer might tell to a younger one over coffee. You ever hear about that guy out in California who built a 4-engine car out of airplane motors? And the younger guy would shake his head, half in disbelief, half in awe. For years, the Quad Al project sat untouched. Covered in dust, hidden in storage, passed quietly between hands that didn't always understand what it really was. Some saw it as a curiosity, a giant mechanical relic from a forgotten dream. But others saw it for what it really represented, a monument to human ingenuity and the courage to imagine something no one else dared to. Eventually, word spread that Quad Al had survived, not running, not complete, but intact. The car, with its 4 enormous engines and impossible scale, had been carefully preserved, its details documented by historians and enthusiasts who recognized its importance. The frame, the massive driveline, the hand-welded torque tubes, and even the mock-up cockpit, all still there. A piece of American engineering mythology frozen in time. As for Jim Little, his story faded quietly for decades, but among those who truly understood what hot rodding meant, not the sponsorships or television fame, but the raw, hands-on act of creation, his name still held a kind of reverence. He represented something that's almost gone today, the lone builder, the man who doesn't wait for permission, doesn't need funding, and doesn't care about rules, the kind of mind that sees an airplane engine and thinks, yeah, I can make that fit in a car. That's not insanity, that's art. And in that sense, Jim Little wasn't just a builder, he was a storyteller. Every car he built told a story about the human spirit, about the refusal to accept limits. In time, magazines and historians began to rediscover his work. Vintage issues of popular hot rodding and Hot Rod magazine resurfaced, featuring grainy black and white photos of Big Al 2, and Quad Al. Each headline carried the same tone, a mixture of disbelief and admiration. The wildest drag car ever built. The man who dared to build 4 engines. The forgotten genius of Jim Little. Collectors and restorers tracked down the surviving pieces. Big Al 2 was partially restored and displayed, while Quad Al became a centerpiece in discussions of America's greatest mechanical experiments. Even today, footage and photos of the car draw millions of views online, not because it raced, but because it existed. It's a physical reminder of a time when ordinary people could build extraordinary things with their own hands. When you look at Quad Al now, the enormous frame, the impossible proportions, and the 4 engines lined like soldiers, it feels almost symbolic. A tribute to an age when imagination wasn't limited by budgets, computers, or rules. An era when a man in a small garage could dream something so audacious that it would echo through history. Because Quad Al was never about speed, it was about possibility. Jim Little proved that you don't need a corporation or a racing team to make history, just courage, skill, and an idea too wild to ignore. And even though he's been gone for nearly 60 years, his voice still lingers in every bolt and rivet of that machine. When you stand in front of Quad Al, you can almost hear him say, "Don't just build what's possible, build what's impossible, and then make it real." That's the legacy of Jim Little. The man who looked at the sky and thought,
I can bring that power to the ground. If you love stories like this, real stories about the people who built the machines that shaped America, make sure you subscribe. There are hundreds more like Jim Little, men and women whose genius deserves to be remembered. Because history isn't just found in museums or books, it's found in garages, under dust, waiting to roar back to life.